whole thing is, once they got into process, they were defeating themselves. They shouldn't have gotten into that, none of them. Who can beat, they were showing polls on the screen.
Yeah, Livingston's thing is bizarre. I mean, nobody cares about your... so glib is good in this thing.
Okay.
Glib is good.
Glib.
Glib is our...
Glib is good.
As Bob Livingston said, oh, he's glib.
Yeah, he's glib, bud.
You remember that moment?
Didn't see it.
Edwards made it.
Okay, quiet on the set.
Okay. Might be helpful, in all these things to repeat the question as well to begin on.
Okay.
Except for the first one. What's your name and what's your involvement in Louisiana politics? What's it been?
Raymond Strother. My involvement is, I started in politics in Louisiana in 1965 and did, I guess, a little bit of everything until I moved to Washington in 1981. And done about 160 campaigns around the country. I guess 70 of them, probably 70 or 80 have been in Louisiana.
Is Louisiana politics different?
Well, it's different in the gusto it's played with. Sometimes other states will bore you to death. Louisiana ranks with Kentucky and Chicago as most interesting places in America to run a race. And it has its own little set of rules, and it's a spectator sport here. You have huge voter turnout, a great deal of interest, and everyone knows someone who's running for office, and it's a form of entertainment.
What makes the state different?
Well, I think there's some cultural things that make the state different. I tried one time to trace why Louisiana spent so much money in campaigns, for example. I don't know if it's still true. At one time, Louisiana spent more money per capita than any state in America in campaigns. So I went back and I was in the attic of the Senate office building in Washington, working for Russell Long in 1980. And I found a stack of records, and it was Huey Long's first presidential speech. And Every Man a King was being played, and it was really a colorful thing. And what it amounted to is Huey Long really started broadcast advertising for politics. Roosevelt was doing fireside chats, but Long was buying 30-minute radio programs and was using radio, using the broadcast medium as a vehicle to talk to America. So he started a tradition here of big spending that in campaigns that we still see today. Also, this was a state that people depended on politics for a source of income, for health, for education. It was a true welfare state. And in a welfare state, when you depend on politics for your well-being, you have a great interest in politics.
Is it a state more diverse than other states?
Yeah, it's diverse. What you have is you have sort of a Latin culture in the Cajuns here. Then you have the Protestant North, and in between the two of them, the clash is really interesting. The Cajuns sort of have a devil-may-care attitude. They're willing to accept more corruption than the people in the North. They approach life differently, a little looser lifestyle than the people in the North, and they don't have the same political requirements that people in the North have. For a long time, the state was completely polarized. People in the North would not vote for people in the South. People in the South tended not to vote for people in the North. That's breaking down. It's changing now. And there's not as much suspicion because communications improved and highways have improved and education's improved. But for a long time, that distrust actually polarized the state completely.
Ray, can I just get you to hunch up a little bit? I'm getting glasses and lights and reflection.
Sure.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Yeah, it can be comfortable. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Where did New Orleans fit in all this?
Well, New Orleans is another country. New Orleans doesn't belong to Louisiana at all. It's a completely different culture, completely different people. It tends to be very black. The people who settle New Orleans are Italian. You know, people think of New Orleans as a Cajun city. It's not a Cajun city at all. It's a great deal more Italian than it is Cajun. So it's very Latin, and it's always been very cosmopolitan. It never fit in with Louisiana. It's never been a part of Louisiana. So in effect, you've had three states here: South Louisiana, North Louisiana, and New Orleans.
What about your own experience in politics here? What have been the most colorful, the most important politicians that you've worked with or you've seen at your time in Louisiana politics?
Well, I think I was with the last great stump campaigner in Jimmy Davis many years ago. And our campaign was a series of shows. You know, that's the best thing you can say about it. We had a traveling stage pulled by a pickup truck We looked like a parade. We had a bus that had a gospel group called the Spear Family. We had another bus that had a hillbilly band with instruments and everything. We had a truck pulling a stage that opened like a butterfly to reveal piano, drums. You plugged it in the local courthouse and you had an instant show. And people came from around to watch the show. There would be 2 hymns sung. There would be two hillbilly songs, and then Jimmy Davis would give his standard stock political speech, and then he would sing "You Are My Sunshine." And the funniest story that ever happened with Jimmy Davis is he was given the same speech he gave in 1941. And so I said, "Governor, you have to have something topical. You have to have something more current." Now, I'm a very young man and pretty idealistic. And he said, "Well, what do you think I should put in this speech?" And I said, "Governor, you should put something about drugs in the speech because it's getting to be a major concern in the state." He said, "Drugs." He said, "You're right." I said, "As press secretary, I don't have anything to report every day. I have nothing to say because you give the same speech you've given for 20 years. Okay, I'll insert." And he took a pencil and drew a line. He said, "Right here in my speech, I'll put something about drugs. Do some research." So we did some research, and we gave him a pile of papers, and he got in the back of his bus where he had a little office, and he worked on his speech. So finally, we were in North Louisiana, some rural town. We had 1,000 people gathered in front of the stage, and the hymns were sung and the songs were sung, and he gives his little speech. And when he comes to the yellow line, there's this pause. And I thought he'd gone to sleep. The pause lasted a minute. He looked at the crowd, and he kept looking back and forth, and finally he said, "Dope. Some people for it, some people against it. Myself, I don't know. Ask your mamas and daddies." And continued the speech. Same old speech as always. After he stepped off the stage, he said, "How'd it go?" I said, "Governor, it was just perfect." Because I knew at that point it was all over.
I take it if he's the last, and that kind of stumps campaign doesn't really exist very much in Louisiana anymore.
No, it really isn't the way to campaign anymore. You can't reach enough people. Electronic media is much more efficient, and it died very slowly. The last stump speech I saw was Edwin Edwards was a great stump speaker 12 years ago, 16 years ago, whatever it was. He was still a stump, but it was the same campaign I'm talking about, the Jimmy Davis campaign. It was the same. It was the last day of stump speaking, where people would actually get out of their homes in this oppressive Louisiana heat and humidity and go to the courthouse steps and listen to someone speak for an hour. It just won't happen anymore.
Now, at the same time, though, the campaigns, in their own way, try to revive that. We followed the Jim Brown caravan. You had Tozan on the train. We went to Crowley and the Rice Festival. It was like a parade of politics.
Politicians in Louisiana are hanging on to yesterday with dear life because they still are reluctant to trust modern campaign techniques for their election. They're still trying to blend yesterday and tomorrow or today. And what you'll find is they get very uneasy when people tell them that you can reach enough people with television. Sooner or later, they get on a train and they go across the state, or they get a caravan and they go across the state because they're not perfectly secure yet in their ability to get elected without that. They still think they can shake enough hands to get elected. They're a little bit behind the times here now.
Does that help them make the politics of the state more colorful in some way?
Oh, it makes it a lot more colorful. It takes monumental organization to put those things together. It takes a lot of work, a lot of money, and when you bring a lot of people into a campaign, you bring a lot of characters into a campaign, people who feed on political activity, and it makes it a lot more fun. It's interesting. I love the smoky back rooms, and the state's filled with them.
What about McKiffin?
Great character, great speaker, an incredible speaker. Used to travel with him.
Could you say McKiffin?
Yeah, John McKiffin. John McKiffin was an incredible political character in Louisiana politics. I was a very young man when I worked for him first. I was 24 years old. And I sort of learned personal politics from John McKiffin. The funniest thing he ever did was he asked me to handle a campaign for him for Mary Evelyn Parker, who was running for treasurer of Louisiana. And I'd never done anything like that before, so I got involved in the campaign, and Mary Evelyn didn't know anything about new campaigns, and I was trying to make the transition myself. I was 24, 25 years old. There was no school for political consultants at the time. So I actually drove her around in an old Buick and drove her, made her television commercials, wrote her news releases, and accompanied her to cocktail parties and fundraisers. So one day I'm sitting in the car outside a sheriff's house. I got so tired of teas and cocktail parties, I wouldn't even go in. I was sitting in the car, asleep. And an old sheriff in a white suit with 2 guns came up, and he said, "Son," he said, "you represent Miss Mary Evelyn?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, we're kind of worried about her safety. He says, traveling around the state, a lady like that traveling around the state. He said, I brought you a pistol. He said, he said, can you use this? And it was a big pistol, it was a 45. I said, yes, sir, I can use that. He said, get out here. And he filled the chamber with bullets, and he handed me the pistol. And he said, shoot that stump. And I had to empty the revolver into the stump, and while he made adjustments in the way I held the pistol and the way I aimed, until he was satisfied, and he reached in his pocket and got a handful of cartridges and handed them to me, put them in my coat pocket. He says, now put that under the seat. And he said, you're going to need that sooner or later. And that was the old politics, not understanding the new politics.
What was McKithen like as a politician in Louisiana?
Well, he started out as a reformer. He was a reformer all the way through. A man with a big heart, with an incredible wit, who enjoyed collecting characters. He would go to the mansion late at night, and he would take naps in the afternoon. So he's really hard on his staff, people like me who worked for him off and on. He'd make life tough because he'd take a nap for about 2 hours in the afternoon. And then he would drink Canadian Club till about 2 o'clock in the morning. And he would start calling you to do things for him at 10 o'clock at night. I remember one time I made a half-hour show for him, and he wanted to make it on the front porch of his home in Columbia. He was one of the original country boy governors. So he was going to make this half hour sitting in a porch swing on the front porch. So we got there, and I had the camera set up. I was finally learning what I was doing for a living. I was finally understanding the mechanics of this thing, and I had a pretty nice setup, a good film guide, some good lights and everything. So he showed up about 3 hours late in a squad car. He loved fast police cars, and he came up in a cloud of gravel. And he sat on the porch swing. He said, Raymond, he said, I just don't feel right in here. He said, I want you to go get me a Jimmy Davis album. He said, I don't feel right in here. I want you to get me a Jimmy Davis album and put it on a jukebox. He called everything a jukebox. Put it on the end of the porch. And I want to hear hymns while I do this. So I said, Governor, you can't do that because you'd hear it. He said, well, there's music in political programs. I said, well, you put it there. You don't let it override. He said, no. He said, I know what I'm doing. He said, I don't want to hear any of that. He said, put it over there on the porch. So the sound man had the headsets on. And he said, Raymond, you've got to do something. All I hear is that music. I said, well, turn it down. I said, Governor, I've got to turn it down. He said, well, turn it down till I can hear it, and he can't. So I was terrified of John McKithen. I depend on him for my livelihood. So finally we turned it down. I asked the sound man, can you hear it? And he said, yes. I said, okay, Governor, it's okay. And we did the half-hour show. So the film was processed, and the governor called me about midnight. He said, Raymond, he said, I want to hear what I said. He said, do you have an audio tape of it? I said, yes, sir, I do. He said, well, come on up to the mansion. So this was about midnight. So I went to the mansion, and I put it on a tape player. And you could hear, a sunbeam, heavenly sunbeam. And it's really what you could hear. McKithen says, my God, man. He said, we can't have that going out like that. He said, all you can hear is the hymn. You can't hear me. I said, I know, Governor. He said, well, you got to fix it. He said, call them and tell them to take that out. So I called WDSU, who had shot it. And I called WDSU, and I said, this guy answered the phone. And I said, the governor says all he can hear is your heavenly sunbeam. And he said, yeah, Raymond, I told you. It's on the porch, that's what was going to happen. I said, I know. I said, can you fix it? He said, of course not. I said, you can. I said, terrific. And I told the governor, I said, we'll fix it. I didn't know what to do. It went on the next day. So I drove to New Orleans that night, paid overtime, and got the studio together, the people together, and they played it for me. So I found another piece of music that was about the same key, and I played it really loud. It was one of McKithen's favorite hillbilly songs called Black Dirt Farmer or Red Dirt Farmer or something, I don't remember. So I played it really loud so you could barely hear McKithen. And every time Sunbeam came up too loud, I would turn the music up, the new music up, and down when it appeared to have less volume. So McKithen came down with all his entourage to see the final product. He said, you fixed it. I said, yes, sir. We went into the room beside the studio, and I gave all the secretaries $5 to bang garbage cans. We opened the windows onto Royal Street. Opened the windows onto Royal Street so you didn't get nothing but traffic noise. And I sat him I moved all the furniture way far away from the television set. And his aide was a driver who died later named H.D. Ruffin, who was about 3/4 deaf. and he was sitting there with him. And he watched it, and he said, "Mother," talking to his wife, he says, "could you hear a hymn?" She said, "John, I swear I heard something." And he says, "Play it again." So we played the program 4 times with secretaries beating on the garbage can outside, cars going up and down the street. Finally, the arbiter of the whole thing was H.D. Ruffin. He said, "H.D., did you hear a hymn?" He said, "Governor, I could barely hear anything." So we put it on the air. And it worked. But that was the kind of man he was to deal with. He was a spectacular speaker. I would write a speech for him. He would tear it in little pieces and say, "I have a message on my heart." And I don't remember him ever having delivered a speech I wrote. It was really frustrating. And he would give a speech. It was half preacher, half Protestant, backwoods preacher, and half politician. That was musical, lyrical. He'd have people crying and weeping. And then he would walk off the stage, get a bottle of Canadian Club, pour him a big drink, get in the car, and laugh about the reaction he'd just seen, drive off. Incredible character.
Do you have any experience at all when you were younger at all seeing Earl Long?
I rode with him, rode in a car with him one time. I was in college.
Earl Long.
I rode in a car with Earl, I'm sorry. I rode in a car with Earl Long. It was an interesting experience. I was working for a little paper called the Natchitoches Times. I went to Northwestern State for a year in Northwest Louisiana on a track scholarship. I went there a year. So as a reporter, as an assignment, journalism assignment, I rode with Earl Long across from Natchitoches to Alexandria, Louisiana, through a sort of back road. And we'd go along, and he would look out, and then we'd see these shotgun shacks with a wrecked car in the front yard and an old basketball goal made from old boards with a basket hoop on it, and kids and really poor people, just hard scrabble all through. And he's looking out the window, very reflective. He said, "Son," he said, "see those people out there?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Good people, fine people, honest people." He says, "Never broke the law." He said, "You know why?" "No, sir." He said, "Never been tempted." And I think that was what he was saying is temptations in Louisiana politics were great. And these people didn't have to put up with those temptations, because often if you're a politician in Louisiana and you're tempted, you fall.
You got Earl Long, you got John McKithen, Jimmy Davis. Obviously, you don't have any personal experience with Huey Long, but we remember him. Edwin Edwards, maybe the most powerful of the bunch. This is just one state. I mean, how come?
Why Louisiana rather than other? I don't know. I think that there's some kind of great screening process out there, that all the candidates who are dull and who are smart but dull are stopped someplace, and they can't get through this filter, because people aren't interested in bright but dull candidates. We had one governor, Dave Treen, who was a complete disaster for 4 years. He bored the press, he bored the people, and he couldn't get reelected. They reelected Edwin Edwards. They were tired of this dull governor. They associated dullness with incompetence, and maybe he was incompetent. He's a Republican, maybe he was. But they associated dullness and incompetence. And he lasted 4 years. And we have a governor's race going on right now. We have another dull man running as a Republican. I don't think he can be elected. I just don't think he's colorful enough for the state.
Why does the state want those kinds of colorful folks?
Well, I really don't know. I mean, I don't have an answer for it, except that Louisiana's always sort of like to thumb its nose at the rest of the country. And when Edwin Edwards is on 60 Minutes saying audacious things, they're a little proud of that. We're different than the rest of the country. They love that difference. And they like their politicians to reflect that difference. I think that could be it. They don't like dull politicians. And they'll even tolerate corruption and some abuses if they think the governor is a little bit of a renegade and not like the rest of the country. They don't want to be like the rest of the country. This is an island.
Is there more temptation to corruption in Louisiana than there is elsewhere?
Oh, sure. There's a lot. One thing is a lot more cash here for some reason. I don't know why. I've worked in 40 states. There's more cash. Some person told me one time that cash was generated by oil, and it could be, because I've seen suitcases filled with $100 bills time after time after time. Pardon me. So there's a lot of cash. There's a tradition of cash here. And Huey Long started. Earl Long continued it. Earl Long would go to a grocery store and start handing out dollar bills to people. It was not unusual. Or hams, or chickens, or sides of bacon. I mean, that was just accepted. I watched an old politician one time who was on his last legs, about to die, and when he went into a football stadium, he had his pockets filled with $50 he would give to children. It was just a tradition of giving money. Politics and money sort of married here, and people expected politicians to financially support them. And then I think that's still, some vestiges of that still hang on.
This is exactly what we want. It's very good stuff.
Kitten was doing live half-hour programs. In fact, when I got in this business, we did live commercials.
You're talking about 27 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did live commercials still here in this city, where people would rehearse a candidate, cue him unrehearsed. A man who was desperate. He was way behind the mayor of New Orleans. He had no money. He had mortgaged his house and was running on mortgaged money and had nothing left. And this "won't you help me" was pure desperation. And somehow it just ate through and people understood what he was saying. "Won't you help me" became his, we were taping that too. It was taped but done live. And the program was so effective it was used other places. But it was 30-minute programs before everything was 30-second spots. Another good thing that happened in Louisiana, we had television shakedown artists here that I've never seen in another state. You had 3 people who did 30-minute television programs, scurrilous television programs live. They'd take a glass of whiskey and put on the podium, and usually no notes and no script, and they would just scream for half an hour about various sins of politicians. They were spoilers. So there was this one candidate particularly. I was up in the governor's mansion in the den upstairs with Governor McKithen having a drink, and we were laughing. And one of these candidates called, one of these candidates that had this scurrilous 30-minute television program. And he said, "Tell McKithen I want $5,000. And I said, $5,000? He said, "Yeah, tell him $5,000 or I'm going to talk about him." I said, "Governor, this guy wants $5,000. He said, "Give it to him. Give it to him." He said, "That's much cheaper than having to pay to undo what he's going to do." So he said, "Give it to him." So the guy was actually shaking people down. Another one of these shakedown guys was running for office. And he said, "What I'm going to do, Raymond?" He said, "I'm going to run for office." He said, "I'm going to come in third and I'm going to sell my support." He said, "I can pick up $30,000, $40,000. He says, I make every 2 years I can make money this way." He said, "It's wonderful." So I didn't have anything to do with him, but he was one of these characters. And I collect characters, like some people collect stamps, and I think it's interesting. Louisiana characters interest me. So I was at my place in North Louisiana. I had a place on a lake real late at night. This fellow called me and said, "Raymond." I said, "Yeah." He said, "I got elected. What do I do now?" I said, "I have no idea." I said, "You've got a problem."
I'm sure he had a fine record in office.
Oh, it was a disaster. It was just a disaster.
Can I ask you a question? It's along the line of money and there being a lot of temptation. Do people expect that people go into politics because there's money in it? I mean, other states, people, have visions of being statesmen-like and doing things for people. In Louisiana, is there a certain expectation you go into politics?
Well,
make your killing?
in Louisiana, it's public perception. Of course he's rich. He's in politics. Is that real? No, there's some really straight people in Louisiana in politics, a lot of them. But the public perception is, well, of course he's rich. He's been elected 3 times. What you expect? That's common Louisiana perception.
But it's not looked on negatively.
No. It's not looked on negatively because those politicians can also help you. It's against the law to get shell on a driveway, but if it's on my driveway, I don't care about the law. And so politicians have been using shell and all sorts of contracts for years and years to help people, and they're not going to complain about it. And you get in a jam here, and the courts can be sticky, and let's say you get a ticket or you get arrested for something, call a politician, and he springs you. Well, that's what he's supposed to do. It's part of it works very well. It's very Latin. It's the politician is there to serve, and if he's a little corrupt, that's okay because he also has enough left over for me.
Now, there are other places like that in the United States.
Sure.
But not that many.
It's not institutionalized as well as it is in Louisiana. There are other places like this. We have institutionalized corruption in Louisiana. It's dying, though.
What about Edwin Edwards?
Edwin Edwards is one of the great political characters of all time. He would rank with Huey Long, because what he brought to the scene is, he brought an incredible mind. He's one of the brightest men to ever be in Louisiana politics. There's no doubt about that. He was sort of the transition into modern politics. He ran a stump campaign, but he was brilliant on television. He had a good sense of timing. He used polling techniques. He used data better than other people. He ushered he and a guy named Gillis Long, a congressman now dead, ushered modern politics into Louisiana. Edwards was a young congressman. He was attractive, vigorous, and a reformer. Came in to correct abuses in the state and won as a reformer, and was dazzlingly effective, and actually froze Louisiana in place for about 16 years. Politics has basically not changed since Edwards came in. It's beginning to change, but he basically froze it in place. The way you get elected, that's why people are still going on caravans. That's why people are still doing personal campaigns, because Edwin Edwards still does it. And he's the model for other politicians in the state. That's how you get elected. You mimic Edwin Edwards. That's changing. I don't think that in 4 years you'll see any of the vestiges of that kind of campaign left. But he is the single most colorful politician I've ever met.
Describe things that you see and remember about him as in office or campaign that are indicative of his style.
His candor. Edwin Edwards' candor has never been approached by any other politician. I read in the paper this morning about one of his opponents. He was talking about one of his opponents, and he said, "The guy's been in bed with me," talking about making political deals. If you ask Edwin Edwards about selling jobs, and someone accused him of selling a job for, I don't know, $25,000 or $30,000, he said, "Oh, no, it was 50." He's absolutely candid, and his candor is disarming, and that makes him unlike anybody else. I remember when the press had a wonderful story. They had a picture and a story that Edwin Edwards actually went to Las Vegas. So we had all the press gathered in front of Edwin Edwards, and someone stood up, and this was early in his first administration. This is when I really took his measure at this time. Stood up and said, "Governor, we know that you've been to Las Vegas. We have a picture." He said, "Sure. I go all the time. I love to gamble. My money. I can gamble if I want to. I love to gamble." Next. Question was dead. There was nothing else you could do at that point. He's a genius.
Why can he get away with that and other politicians not, or are other politicians just not as candid?
A lot of politicians aren't as smart as he is, and not as candid as he is. And he's known for his candor and his intelligence and his wit. He has a great wit. And it's another case where people in Louisiana forgive a lot of sins if you entertain them, and he's entertaining.
Have you ever been anywhere near him during a campaign?
Oh, sure. I've worked for him. I did his first re-election campaign.
What was he like out campaigning?
Well, interestingly enough, he would listen to advisors. He wasn't as headstrong as some candidates I've associated with, or some campaigns I've been in. He would actually listen. He would have a lot of people around him screaming advice, a whole table of people, maybe 10 people, and usually with their own agendas, each of them trying to sink the other one, because it's very divisive a lot of times in politics. And he would listen to all of us, and he'd say, "Okay, here's what we're going to do, A, B, C." And it was over. The discussion did not have to go past that. There's no reason to come back and try to change his mind. He would listen, though. Then he'd make up his mind. I found him a very astute campaigner. That's why he's so dangerous in a race like is going on in October of 1987. He's still dangerous because he's so bright, and he has such good instinct, and he understands the process so well. It makes him very dangerous.
He's just had a third term that he's been beset by problems. The state's economy, much of it not under his control, has made things very difficult to govern Louisiana. Why is he even running this time?
I've asked people why he was running. I made a bet that was someone that he would not run. I was confident he could not run because I looked at the polls, he looked at the polls. His negative was very high. The state was in dire financial straits. The truth is, I suspect if an 8-foot bully had ever walked up to Edwards and knocked a chip off his shoulder, he'd have stood and slugged it out. And I think that's what's happened here. I think his pride's involved. And I think he won't back down. He's never backed down from a fight, and I think this is the fight he won't back down from. You know, I'm saying this, I'm running a campaign against Edwin Edwards, but I'm saying this with a certain touch of admiration.
Is it going to be strange if he ends up losing this race? I mean, not strange that anybody can lose, but he's never lost. He's a dominant figure in politics.
Well, you know, everybody's never lost, but when he was elected, there had never been a Catholic elected governor of Louisiana, and he was elected. There had never been a congressman elected governor of Louisiana, and he was elected. So he has all kind of firsts. So he's never been defeated before, but he can be defeated this time. He will be defeated this time, in my opinion. There's some people in this room who disagree with that, but I think he'll be defeated this time. Things change. He is now 60 years old. Politics has moved on. It's entered another era in Louisiana.
You know, you've gotten the opportunity to look at it. Do you think that there's a major distinction and difference between his personal, the way he conducts his personal life, and his political life? And he seems to be a much different person off of the political podium.
Oh, I don't know. I don't think so. I think Edwin Edwards is a consummate politician. I don't think there's a distinction between personal and political with him. I think he is one. Edwin Edwards is a political animal, and that's what he is. It'd be like saying at night a dog is a cat, but in the daytime he's a dog. No, Edwin Edwards is a politician 24 hours a day. I haven't found his personal conduct a great deal different than his political conduct. When I've been with him on social occasions, he's acted just the same way he does on the stump. You know, he's straightforward. He's a little more reclusive than I think people realize. He's a little more private, probably, in his personal life than people realize. He's a little quieter than people realize, and a little more introspective than people realize. But he's a political animal. Good one.
How is the politics of the state changing? Is Buddy Romer the sign of the change?
Buddy Romer is one of the signs of the change, of what's happening in the state, yes. Louisiana is entering a stage like other southern states. The South has always been interested in sending someone a message. Let's send them a message. Let's not change. Let's send them a message. They have to change. The South's beginning to change. And there's a trend, as you see Tennessee change, and you see Arkansas change, and you see Florida change, Louisiana's beginning to change. One thing, our population's becoming more homogenized. You have a lot of people moving in who weren't natives here. You have a lot of people who've been educated other places, and the state's becoming homogenized. There are not these huge barriers built around us of okra, gumbo, and crawfish anymore. And as it becomes more homogenized, and as it steps in the mainstream of the rest of the country, our politics are becoming more and more like Minnesota, more and more like Indiana, less and less like Huey Long's Louisiana.
Is that necessarily bad?
It won't be as much fun. I won't sit at Bob DeHemicourt's house and tell funny stories. You won't have all the political reporters, junkies hanging around from the networks hanging around here, wanting to hear political stories. I actually went to a meeting the other day, a political meeting here, and there was a sign on the table that said no smoking. Couldn't believe that. No smoke-filled room. Incredible. I went to, Buddy Romer's had steering committee meetings without a bottle of whiskey. That's strange to me. I'm not used to that. Things have changed. And the sanitized version of Louisiana politics is efficient, but not nearly as much fun.
I think Earl Long said someday the folks of Louisiana are going to get good government, and they ain't going to like it.
Well, you know, one time somebody told me, Gillis Long told me one time, he said, "Am I for good government? I'm for pretty good government." And I think Louisiana is not necessarily for good government, but they're increasingly asking for pretty good government. I think that's it. We had a phone bank though recently in the Buddy Romer campaign, and we're talking to people. And I've heard this story before, but it actually happened here, where the phone bank's talking to some people and asked this woman who was she supporting in the governor's race. She said, "Oh, none of them. It only encourages them if you vote."
Do you remember in the '83 Edwards race, he made a fairly famous statement about his electability?
Oh yeah, Edwin Edwards in 1983 said he could be elected unless he got caught in bed with a live boy or a dead girl. And, that's the most candid I've ever heard a politician.
Was it true?
Oh yeah, he could not have been defeated. It was only the margin we were interested in at that time. I wasn't involved in the race except on the periphery. I was living in Washington. I was just sticking my nose in every now and then because I have so many people, friends in the Edwards camp. All the old political establishment I grew up with in this state, and I know them all. And always interested. And I guess if I ran to Edwin Edwards right now, although I'm running a campaign against him, we would go off together and talk and laugh. I doubt our friendship's been bruised too much.
One other question, you were talking about new politics and how really television is the key to that. It seems to me that many more people are spending money on television commercials, the non-gubernatorial races. I mean, you look at the 6 o'clock news and there's, Harry Lee and Art Lentini going at each other with these very heavy-hitting commercials for
Sure.
Sheriff of Jefferson Parish. Is that something that's a Louisiana phenomenon, people spending a lot of money on
coroner.
local and small,
Jeff
coroners
Parish.
races?
That's only Louisiana. You go to other states, there's some things you see here that you don't see anyplace else. For example, when you drive down the boulevards here, you'll see 10,000 signs on stakes in the middle of the boulevard. If you go to Gary, Indiana, you won't see one. If you go to Hartford, Connecticut, you won't see one. You see that here. Most house races, U.S. house races, don't use television. Very few of them use television. Television's too expensive a medium. But here you'll run for clerk of court using television. Here, I've seen people spend more money running for city council of New Orleans than running for governor of Connecticut. I actually ran a campaign for the governor of Connecticut, Bill O'Neill, where we spent less than $1 million. I've seen more than $1 million spent in so many races. Here, there's a little tiny town outside of New Orleans called Kenner. I don't know how many tens of millions of dollars have been spent there. It's just phenomenal. But now if you run for anything, always, if you run for anything in Louisiana, as long as there's been television, you've used television. It's sort of a monkey see, monkey do process. Remember what I told you, that if Edwin Edwards uses television or if John McKithen uses television, the people in the political tiers under them mimic them and do the same thing. And the governor sets the political style. So if you elect a governor here with a different political style, Louisiana politics will probably be changed forever.
There's also a lot more candidates to vote for. There's more offices that are elected here.
Oh, we elect everybody. We elect the custodian of voting machines here. The guy who takes care of voting machine maintenance in Louisiana is elected. The superintendent of education. In New Orleans, they have a civil sheriff. They have 2 sheriffs in New Orleans. Both of them are elected. No, you have more elected offices here than any place in the country. It's amazing. You elect Secretary of State, Attorney General, Lieutenant Governor, Superintendent of Education. I think that's changing. But no other state elects all the people this state elects. It's just incredible.
Why do we elect so many people? Part of the culture?
Yeah, it's part of the culture. It's ingrained. Remember, this is a populous state, and people don't want to give up control to some political group they don't know. If the governor made appointments, they wouldn't have control over it. They want local control of everything. I mean really local control. We're talking about down to the block level. They want local control. They want to elect everyone. Anytime you try to abolish an elective office, make an appointive office, you catch holy hell in this state, because that's getting involved in their control, their local control, populism. Yeah, tough.
That's it.
Okay.
Thank you. That was great.
Sure.